Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name is Simon Good. I'm a professional mediator, and this is a training seminar looking at the 5 different kinds of conflict. It's really important stuff to understand whether you're engaging in conflict yourself or you're supporting other people in conflict. Maybe you're a manager at work, a team leader, that kind of thing. And one of the common mistakes that people often make is that they assume that all kinds of conflict are the same. But actually, there are different kinds of conflict that you might encounter. And if you can figure out what factors are driving the conflict, it often opens up the door to develop options for responding rather than just taking a knee jerk reaction. Something that I've noticed about people who haven't had training in conflict resolution is that they tend to have almost like a default way of dealing with conflict. They think about all conflict as data, for example, so they keep explaining again and again why the other person's wrong and they're right. And they're sometimes even surprised about the fact that they're not making any more progress, when underneath it actually is a clash of values, or there are structural factors that's going on, or that kind of thing. So what I'll do in the video today is explain these 5 different kinds of conflict, what they look like. I'm going to give some examples of what kinds of things that you might notice, particularly in workplaces, although similar types of conflict would exist in families, couple relationships as well. I'll be looking at workplaces. I'll give some examples around what each of these different types of conflict might look like, and then some options for responding. So the first one that we'll look at is relationship conflict. This, interestingly, often emerges as almost like the tip of the iceberg. This is the stuff that you might notice. The simplest way to understand relationship conflict is, like, for me, I know when I have friends or family come and stay at my house for an extended period of time, like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, that kind of thing. I guess a lot of people in the world can probably tolerate that type of thing. I mean, a lot of people live with extended family, but for me, it's usually just my family in my house. And so when I have extra people come and stay, we just start to rub each other the wrong way. This is relationship conflict. It's the miscommunication, the you say good morning to someone and they don't say anything. It might just be that they had their AirPods in, but you don't realize that. And so you think, oh, well, what's their problem? What are they upset about? After all, I'm letting them stay with me and eat my food or whatever else. So I get a little bit of grumpiness there. And then when they come to me and say, do you want a coffee? I might respond a little bit more tersely than normal. Yeah, no thanks, I'm fine. And then they look at me and think, what's his problem? This is what's on the screen there is that last point, the reciprocal negative spiral pattern. It's almost like the initial misunderstanding, or maybe it's a contextual factor that's contributed to someone just being a little bit grumpier than normal. They haven't had much sleep, they're under the pump at work. And then when you deal with them and they're a little bit more terse, a little bit more abrupt, a little bit more rude, less sensitive than normal, it's easy for us to take that personally. And then unfortunately, we often then respond in kind. So it's things like tension, resentment, blame, irritability. So, 2 people who are constantly at each other's throats and butting heads at work, this could be a sign of relationship conflict from starting to develop there. And so then in terms of options for responding, what I often suggest, at least initially, is to just tolerate what you can. People are not always going to be cheerful and in a good mood. There will be times when one of your staff have been up all night looking after a sick kid, or their parents chronically ill or something like that, or they're going through chronic pain themselves. I mean, we just don't know. So try not to make assumptions about what's driving the other person's behavior. And to be honest, a lot of the time when I'm doing conflict coaching, I often start by saying, just what if you did nothing? Are you sure that this is a problem that you need to get involved with here? Because we don't need to become involved in every conflict that we're dealing with. Just because someone's rude to us at work doesn't mean we need to bite back and put them in their place and they can't talk to us like this. It's like, who cares? Do you know what I mean? Do you really want to spend your day dealing with drama from this annoying person on your team? I think a lot of the time it's in your own best interest just to let something go. Yep, they shouldn't have made that comment. It was rude. It was disrespectful. It's not fair. It's not right. It's not true. I should correct them. On the other hand, I just want to have my lunch and read a book or watch a YouTube video or something and relax. So think about what you can tolerate. Discuss patterns. So here I'm talking about saying to someone, it seems like every time we talk about money, we end up in a fight. Or I know you're dealing with staffing challenges at the moment. Um, one of the um, one of the things that I'm experiencing is when I come to you to bring it up, you often become really angry. And it makes it difficult then for me to know which information to share with you and when I'm sharing too much and actually it's starting to bother you. So we're just sort of noticing and discussing this pattern that's developed. Every time we talk about this is what seems to happen. I've noticed that there's a lot of changes at the last minute to the rosters, and that often means that people end up pretty frustrated at each other, especially when they'd been counting on doing a particular shift and then things change. I'm wondering if maybe we could touch base and figure out a way to plan that's going to still allow some flexibility, but also give people a little bit more of a platform that they can use for planning around work, that kind of thing. Empathy is really important here, just especially with the other side. It sounds like for you, when I didn't say hello, you thought that I was really grumpy with you. It makes sense given the fact that we'd had that argument the night before. Yeah, so I can see where you're coming from then in terms of you maybe being a little bit more sensitive than normal when we went into that next client meeting. Just summarizing what the other person said, this is often the point where they start to feel understood. It's usually not just by you saying, I understand. And then a really important part is to clarify expectations. So, this is what we're both prepared to do moving forward, and establishing and holding on to boundaries when needed. Okay, well, look, we've both talked through our perspective, and it sounds like you were annoyed about this, and I've been sitting there thinking that you're overreacting. All right, now we can see where each other are coming from. Now, the important step is to clarify, well, what are we going to do differently moving forward? So I might say something like, look, when you talk about those types of topics, I just want you to know that I'll do my best not to overreact. I'll try to give you the benefit of the doubt. What would be helpful for me, though, is that if you could be sensitive around talking around that particular topic, given the fact that you know that it's a volatile issue within my team. It's just, this is what I'm going to do, this is what you're going to do. Are we both on the same page about this? And then if the other person's not following what they've agreed, this is the point where we need to be assertive. You can find other videos actually on my channel talking about different options for positive confrontations, for giving ultimatums, that kind of thing. So that's relationship conflict. That one often comes about as a result of the other four types of conflict, though. So I usually talk about it first when I'm doing training workshops like this, or videos like this, I guess. But when I'm coaching leaders, particularly at higher levels, like executive leaders, I often suggest that it's worth leaving that relationship conflict stuff until last. Like, you can figure it out if you've got a disjointed team, maybe taking them out for lunch and doing a bit of team building, that would be helpful. But if underneath that there's a problem with all of their job descriptions and a lack of accountability or something like that, then the lunch out's not going to solve the problem. So I would look at the data, the interest, the structural, and the values conflict first, and then come back to relationship conflict if I haven't already been able to resolve it, if that makes sense, in many situations at least. So, data conflict is basically conflict related to the information, the data. It could be a contract if it's conflict with a client, it might be job descriptions, it might be a misunderstanding about agreement. You've agreed your department would do this. No, I didn't. That's not something I said we would do. I said that I would try my best. This is an example of data conflict. One party thought that there was an agreement, and the other one thought that there wasn't. This could be true. There actually was a genuine misunderstanding, or it might be forgetting, misreading. And to be honest, at times, I think sometimes that selective perception creeps in, selective forgetting, selective misremembering. I don't know what your experience has been like, but some people I've worked with, I didn't trust 100%. And one of the, I guess, early symptoms or signs, warning signs for me, were this misremembering of the facts. It's possible, though, that there is a genuine misinterpretation or there's just an ambiguous clause in an email or a contract. And so there are different interpretations possible. The point here is that the conflict is being caused by different data or working from different perspectives on the data. So the first step then needs to be clarify the data. So we want to acknowledge and normalize the conflict. It makes sense why after that meeting you took it as an agreement. Actually, I hadn't intended that to be something that we were committing to. I can see where you're coming from, but thinking about the language, it also seems to me like it wasn't as clear as it should have been. So it's just acknowledging, this is what's happened. Things weren't as clear as it should have been. It seems like there's been some crossed wires, there's been a bit of a mix up or in communication, that type of thing. I'm just acknowledging it in this very neutral way that, oh, look, these things happen. This is where we're up to now. Let's clarify the information to make sure we're on the same page at the moment, and then develop a plan that we can both live with moving forward. So it's really saying, look, let's make sure that we go through and avoid this issue coming up in the future and resolve not what needs to be resolved in the moment. And then we can develop a plan for making sure that we minimize this type of thing in the future. Now, when you're dealing with data conflict, in some situations, you need to decide how accommodating or how assertive to be. If it's with a client, for example, and there's been a misunderstanding about scope, they think that something should be included within the original quote, whereas you think that it would be charged on top. You can go back and clarify the data, which is, well, did we actually agree to this? What does the contract say in terms of the inclusions and exclusions? But you also need to consider, well, how much is this worth to us? How much is it worth fighting? Is there potential for future work with this client? Maybe we should just sort of cop the loss ourselves with the view that it's good for the brand and reputation and there might be follow-up business for us. It's just worth pausing and thinking about, like, we figured out what's going on in terms of what's causing the conflict, but we also need to clarify our goal before we decide which action is going to be the most appropriate. Structural conflict. This is often things like the hierarchy within an organization, the structure, that meetings, like who's in the room, how long does the meeting go for? Is it formal? Is there an agenda sent out? Can people just raise something on the spot? How decisions get made, who are the decision makers, what input people are allowed about decisions that affect them, and how communication happens. Where structural conflict is causing the where structural factors are causing the conflict, obviously the best starting point in many cases is to figure out how that's contributing and change it. But in the short term, probably in many situations, what you'll need to do is to just adapt as best you can to the structural constraints that you're dealing with. So some options for responding, we again want to acknowledge the structural impact. Maybe if we're dealing with someone overseas within our company, we could say something like, it's always challenging trying to find the right time to meet, given that we're working with very different time zones, or I know that you've got a lot of stuff on your plate at the moment. Getting this many different levels of approval for a simple change, it often requires more time than we anticipate. We're just acknowledging, this silly company that we work for requires 18 bosses up the line to sign off before a simple thing happens. And so that's what's causing the conflict. So me hassling my boss again and again about what's going on with those approvals, I can also acknowledge the fact that I know it's because there's so many different people that you're needing to wrangle that's causing some of this delay. At the same time, this is the deadline that I'm working to, or whatever your situation is. So we would acknowledge the impact, look for options for changing the structure, but in the short term, it's usually just about adapting. Look, it would be good if these things were more clear, or we had more time, or we could push back this deadline. Down the track, we can talk about how we would do things differently at the next stage of the project. Right now, though, what I'd like to do is just clarify next steps and make sure that we're all on the same page. Interest conflict. It often evolves around mutually exclusive goals, or someone's going to have to do something and nobody wants to do it. You can see on the screen there the picture of musical chairs. This game is interest conflict, sort of personified almost. It might be the incentive structure, a particular project that everyone wants to work on, or a particular client that nobody wants to work on, a project that involves extra travel, going back and fixing a problem, which is going to be very tedious and frustrating, working outside in the sun all day and sort of figuring out who's going to have to do this really unpleasant thing. Um, the challenge with this type of conflict is that there's no magic wand that we can wave. Someone has to go and drive out and do that project with the travel, and only one person can be promoted into the manager's job. But what you might find is that there's conflict that arises within team members when that manager job position's vacant, especially if a few of them have all applied. So the way that we would deal with interest conflict is to discuss the situation, to focus on the future and the solutions, to try to develop mutual interests and clarify expectations as well as planning. So say there's a manager's position vacant in a team and a few of the people have all applied. I might consider meeting with them or meeting with the team more broadly and saying to them, look, I just want to touch base with you all. It can be a tough spot to be when you're in limbo, wondering about what's going on with the manager's position. As you know, we'll start the interviews for that next week, and then I'll need to make a decision. At this stage, I'm expecting that could be finalised within the next 3 weeks, and then the new manager would begin as soon as possible. Just to give you a heads up, we've got both internal and external applicants. Of course, all of that process is confidential, but if you have any questions around the process itself, a concern or something like that you want to raise with me, please feel free to shoot me an email or come and see me in my office. So I'm just acknowledging this is where you're at. This is the spot that we're in. This seems to be what's going on. Just in this neutral way. It's like this might be an issue, might be nothing, I don't know. Just want to touch base and flag it though, because the last thing we want is for it to cause issues. And then we would clarify expectations and plan. Look, one thing I would ask is that you keep it confidential. Is that something you can all agree to? That would be an example of clarifying those expectations. The final one is values. This could come down to stuff like communication style, leadership style, like what is polite, what is professional, what is respectful. It's often connected to things like cultural norms. Is it okay to be late to a meeting, for example? As a client, can you interrupt somebody and talk over the top of them? Like, just what's acceptable behavior? Or it could be connected to deeply held beliefs and those kind of values, like someone within a team really values environmental sustainability, and so they want the company to be moving in directions that sort of are in line with that. And somebody else might be really looking at growth within the company as the number one goal at the moment. And so you've got these mutually exclusive values that you're needing to navigate. So, similar to interest conflict, there might not be an easy magic wand that you can use here. The key in most of these situations is simply to acknowledge both perspectives, respectfully observe differences in a mutual and neutral way, and then clarify expectations moving forward. I know for you that environmental sustainability is something that is a really deeply held value for you. I know that you commit a lot of your own time volunteering for different causes, and of course, it's something that's important at work as well. At the moment, given where things are sitting in terms of the budget and the amount of revenue that we'll need available to open this new office, it doesn't look like that we're going to be able to invest in that sustainable option this quarter. But what I would like to do is to prioritize that for the following quarter and as we move into the budget planning there, because I expect that there would be more funds available at that stage. I just want to be transparent with you and upfront, because I imagine this could be quite disappointing news, given the fact that you thought that it would probably fall a different way. So we can just acknowledge this is the situation, these are the different values that we have. Again, you can decide how assertive to be. In that example, I just said, I'm not giving you what you want. You could say, look, we can compromise, meet in the middle, or I'll just be accommodating and give in to what you want, even though it's outside of my value. You've got a number of different options there. So I'd love to hear, what are the main takeaways for you? What is it about these 5 different kinds of conflict has stood out and resonated? And what would you use in your role? Are there particular types of conflict that you encounter at work? And if so, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. But apart from that, just thank you so much for listening. This is a brand new thing for me, doing YouTube. So if you press like or press subscribe, you've got no idea how much of a difference that makes. So thank you very much for watching altogether. But if you'd be willing to press like, a particularly big thank you. Bye for now.